Life as we know it can change in an instant. And that's exactly what our guest today experienced just a little over a year ago when a car accident changed the course of her career and her life. Dr. Mallory Fox is the owner of Foxy FIT and the co-owner of Baptiste Power Yoga Phoenix. She loves to serve her community through mindful movement and conscious connection. She also happens to be a fellow Lululemon ambassador, which is how we met. So it's no surprise that she lists her addictions as Lululemon and coffee. I'm sure a lot of us can relate. Our intention is that today's conversation offers hope to anyone else who may be healing from trauma, and that it would serve as a reminder that even if the attitude of "I'll do it myself" has worked for you in the past, because for a lot of us it definitely has, you can do so much more if you allow others to contribute to you, and remember that you are not meant to do business or life alone. Hey everyone, thanks so much for tuning in today. I have a really special treat for all of you. Those of you who were at the Powerhouse Women event just a few weeks ago probably remember this beautiful angel that I'm about to introduce. And she got to share her story, which had a ripple effect beyond what either of us expected. So I knew that we had to share it with a wider audience on the podcast, and today we get to do that. So Mallory, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. My heart is so full right now.
Oh gosh, well, you know how I feel about you. And you and I actually met through Lululemon. This has become a consistent theme on this podcast. A lot of great people come into my life through Lululemon. And we met as fellow ambassadors, which I know a lot of people probably wonder even what the heck that means. That will be another conversation for another time. But what's crazy, and I love how the world works, your husband, Brian, actually was someone who I had seen and met and talked to years ago at a yoga studio when I was doing hot yoga. And then fast forward, through Lululemon and through that amazing community, you come into my life, and I cannot even imagine my life without you now.
Yes. Yes. Thank goodness that, Brian met you way back in the day. And I remember I had actually expressed interest in going to Powerhouse Women 2017 because I'd heard about it through Lululemon, hadn't met you yet. And I had a conflict for the date. And I remember mentioning it to Brian, and he was like, "Oh my gosh, I know Lindsay Schwartz, and she's amazing." And he was just so excited. If you've ever met Brian, you know how passionate he is. And, he was just like, "Oh my gosh, you have to meet her. You guys would be such good friends." And he was right.
Oh, I just love when things come full circle like that. And, we'll get into a little bit of your story. Back when we did meet, your life looked a lot differently than it does now. And we're going to tell that full story and just really get to, I think a lot of people are going to be able to relate to having experiences and circumstances happen in life where you can literally draw back to that moment and say, life looked one way before and then a totally different way after. So why don't you start with just really sharing the story of who you are, what you do, like who you are for this world, but then that day that changed everything and really gave you a whole new purpose, a whole new mission that we're going to talk a lot more about.
Ooh, okay.
That's not a big question at all to start with.
So, you're sharing that, and I'm like, oh yeah, like I know that pivot moment in my life, and it's such a bittersweet story because it's the hardest year that I've ever been through. And yet, like looking back on who I was before, it's almost like thinking of a different person, but in a really good way. So if you'd met me a year and a half ago, I was very driven, very focused, very businesslike, very matter of fact. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I really loved that about myself. I was very successful. I was always, looking at a checklist and like living my life from goal to goal to goal, and really just pursuing success. I finished my doctorate at age 27. I have 2 master's degrees, and I started a business while I was in grad school. I've been in business for myself for 6 years now, doing what I love. I help people move better and feel better. I was the person in my life who, if people had a question or a problem, they would come to me, and then, I would fix it or help them figure out a plan. And I really lived my life like trying to be the best at everything I did. And then if I tried something and I wasn't good at it, I would, not do it anymore.
Same, sister.
Yeah, because there were just so many options. And I was like, well, why would I do something I'm not good at? And it really worked for me. I created my whole life around this, my business, my friendships, and it was working. At the same time, it was like really stressful. I think back to like what my calendar would look like back then. And I would say I was really driven from fear and from lack. Like, I have to get this done because no one else, I can't trust anyone else to do it. And I was really, I realize now I was very anxious and just driven from that lack mindset. So, but again, like that had worked for me. I started practicing yoga because I knew that that would help me deal with stress and maybe be a little bit less uptight. But yoga was really a struggle because, my goodness, like who can actually clear their mind? I knew I could clear my mind then.
Especially when you're trying to go upside down. My mind is not clear.
Exactly. I'd be like, this is ridiculous. I have things to do. Even doing something good for myself was like checking a box off. Like, okay, I know I need to do yoga, so check. I'm, moving on. So that was just how I lived my life, and I didn't know any different. And it worked really well for me. It got really great results. It was incredibly stressful at the same time. So fast forward to last August, I was on my way to work. I had taught yoga at my husband's Air Force Base, and it was about 7:00 in the morning. And I was driving to my office. I stopped at a red light. And that day I had a lot going on. We were packing our house. We had sold my condo. We'd just gotten married 4 months before. We were buying a house together. What Brian and I had worked out was that, I got everything. Like I'm, in charge of packing and the moving and all of that. And then we were going out of town the next day. And we were going to be out of town for 10 weeks. And we were moving the day after we got back. And, I just had all of these things on my mind. And you and I were actually planning Lululemon's birthday party.
Which was super fun.
It was so much fun. Event with a ton. So I was, sitting at a stoplight thinking of all these things that were on my list, and not to mention a full day of clients. And I glanced in my rearview mirror, and in a split second, I see this woman about to hit me, and she's not looking at the road. So I quickly try to get into the lane that's open next to me. And it was just a split second. I didn't make it. Remember, as my head was hitting my steering wheel, I remember thinking, I don't have time for this today. It wasn't on my list. I can laugh about that now, but it's so interesting how those little insights, those little moments in time just provide like that snapshot of, ooh, like this is really telling.
Yeah.
So I remember that thought clear as day. And then, my brain snaps into action of everything you need to do when you're in an accident. And I hadn't been in an accident for a long time. So I remember thinking, okay, I need to do X, Y, and Z. The other driver was impaired and she had 2 little kids in the car. So it added another element of stress to the situation. She kept trying to leave the scene because she said she needed to get her kids to school. And I just remember in that moment, like being so worried about her children. And she asked me not to call the police or report the accident to my insurance. I was just really conflicted between what I knew I should do and what this person in front of me was asking me to do. So like throughout that situation, it was pretty high stress, and I was able to, do what I do, which is take care of everything and make sure her children were safe and get the authorities there. And in that moment, I realized I'd been at the scene for a while. I'm, messaging my clients that I'm not going to be able to make it. And then, when I got released from the scene, I went home and I just didn't feel right. And I remember thinking, okay, that was a traumatic morning. So I'm going to give myself a few hours to just downregulate and relax. And then I'll go about the rest of my day. And it really just didn't work that way. It was, I had a headache come on within a couple of hours. And the next morning when I couldn't lift my head off of the pillow, and the entire room was spinning from the moment I opened my eyes, it's like, okay, I think I need some help. And I ended up getting medical care and found out that I'd had a concussion and trauma to my brainstem. And that there was a lot of soft tissue damage as well. I had severe whiplash. So, I knew, okay, well, here's my next task. I need to clear what I can from my schedule, travel, moving, all of these things to give myself the support I need for the next couple of weeks. And then, I'll follow A, B, and C, and I'll be back to myself in no time. I was setting a goal. I'll be
creating the checklist.
Yes, creating the checklist, executing the checklist. And then that didn't work. And so it was Powerhouse Women was 3 weeks after my accident. And I was just going about life as normal. I hadn't even really told very many people that I'd been in an accident. I know it for sure. I hadn't told my friends and family the extent of what I was going through. And it was miserable. Looking back now, I had this searing pain in my brain. Felt like there were knives being pressed into my skull. And, I was kind of taking everything day by day and thinking, well, I'll wake up tomorrow morning and I'll be myself again. Or if I just do, enough stretching, I'll wake up and my neck will move. And I was doing everything that the doctor said I needed to do. And so I woke up the day before Powerhouse Women, and I was supposed to do the pop-up photo shoot with the Girl Squad and Monica Linda. And I think of it now, it's like I couldn't even get my eyes open. I wasn't driving. I couldn't drive. Like my whole world was spinning constantly. I was restricted from driving. I remember trying to pick out my clothes for the shoot and I was so dizzy, I just had to keep laying down. And then I finally realized I'm not going to be able to make it to my photo shoot today. Like the whole world just crashed around me because it was like the first time I ever had a thought of, I don't know if I can do this. And it was completely out of my control.
Yeah.
Which I had never had that. I'd never experienced that before in my life. I always had backup plans. And it was the first moment of, I really don't have a backup plan. And my husband came home from work and he looked at me and he was like, I think we need to get you to the hospital. And so we did. We spent the night before Power Swimming in the emergency room. And I just remember feeling really ashamed that I couldn't do it all.
Yeah.
And really felt that there was something wrong with me, that I couldn't fix it. And that I had, failed on commitments. And it just challenged like my belief of who I was even. It was a really lonely, really, really low place.
And I think that's the point that so many women and men, most of our audience is women, can relate to a time in life where life was going along in one way. And I love, man, when you say it had worked really well for you to be wired like you were wired, and then to no longer, like to get to this point where you realize, oh my goodness, like this is no longer going to work for me.
Mm-hmm.
And just knowing you personally and getting to see little glimpses as you were willing to share and open up about what was happening. Now hearing the full story, I had no idea back at that time all that was going on. And I think it was, as you share it, I can see you were starting to little by little actually admit to yourself what was going on.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I couldn't admit to myself,
Yeah.
let alone the people around me. I was raised not to talk about it. Never let people see you struggle. Pain is weakness. And I think back to a year ago, and I kept all of that in. Even my husband, who lived with me and who's a wonderful, intuitive person, like even he didn't know the extent of the pain. He would know that, like, when he would come home from work, I couldn't handle the TV being on. Or if there were, like, let's say, two lights on and he was texting on his phone, like the stimuli of the light and him tapping on his phone, like it would just compound my head symptoms. And then to further complicate that, I was having trouble even getting the words together. So like I would start to realize, oh, okay, my brain can't fix this right now. And yet I couldn't explain to him what it was. Like I lost my words. I couldn't explain. My head is feeling like it's about to explode, and hearing that light tap on your phone is, causing this. I would completely shut down, or if I could, I would physically get up and leave. But I had really bad vision issues as well. The world was constantly spinning. I was seeing double 24/7. And so I fell several times. I've always been physically very strong and mobile. And, I grew up as a competitive swimmer. I worked as a personal trainer. And so to not be in control of my own body was a whole nother layer of craziness.
Yeah.
And so my internal voice was really hard on myself, like just suck it up, just push harder. I've been through a lot of really difficult things in my life, and I've always gotten through it by just pushing through it and pushing past it and working harder. And that didn't work with brain injury. Yeah. I had to start trying something different.
So I know from just hearing your story in the past, there was this pivotal moment when your perspective really had to shift, right? From hurry up and just get better already. Will you talk a little bit about that moment of surrender and how it shifted your perspective of your healing?
Yeah, definitely. So then, like, my motto for life was I would do it myself.
Which is the opposite of the motto, we're not meant to do this alone, which I love because I think so many of us, listen, the whole reason the motto of Powerhouse Women is we're not meant to do this alone is because myself and so many of us have really operated from this perspective of, I'm just going to do it myself. I think so many women can relate to you on that.
Yeah, that's good to hear. And it's, I loved everything that you were about, and, that we're not meant to do this alone. And I even bought the t-shirt thinking, if I wear this cute shirt, like it'll sink in by osmosis that I don't do this alone. And there were so many times when I didn't want to do it alone. I just didn't know how to do it with somebody. And so I remember being at Powerhouse Women the day after I'd been at the ER. And Lori Harder spoke at the end, and I'd read her book and loved it. And the whole theme of the day is, you don't have to do this alone. You're not in this alone. And I'd be like, okay, give me a checklist. Like, what do I need to do to not do this alone? And so it was definitely a process. And through Powerhouse Women, I met some women who were really integral in my process. Dr. Morgan Francis spoke, and if you've ever gotten the chance to see her speak or listen to any of her podcasts, I know she's done with you, Lindsay, with Powerhouse Women. She's just a treasure. And she was speaking on stage, and I had this moment, this tiny little voice in the back of my head that was like, maybe you should go talk to her. And I shut it down really quick. I was like, well, if I ever need help, if I ever need mental health assistance, yeah, I could probably go talk to her. And, but it was just planting those seeds. And I met a woman at Powerhouse Women, Maria, who shared, while we were in line for lunch, she shared her story of healing from trauma. And I remember thinking in the moment, it was so inspiring, and yet not connecting to it that, I was in a similar position at that point. So those were some of the really key seeds that got planted early on in my recovery. I ended up seeing Dr. Morgan Francis in group therapy. And then through that, I felt safe enough to try individual therapy. And it was just life-changing. Learning how to ask for help and ask for support, because it truly never entered my mind. And if you think about it, so I went from doing everything on my own 24/7. Like, my husband would say, do you need anything from the grocery store? And I'd say, no, what do you need? I'll go get it. So that was me before, even when people would offer help, to switch it and then give help, to suddenly I needed help to do everything. I was in physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, vision therapy, psychotherapy, going to the neurologist, running tests. And I needed help for everything. I needed my mom to come with me and help me fill out paperwork because my brain wasn't working right. I remember going to the dermatologist for my routine checkup, and I couldn't remember my medical history. And the nurse had to help me. She's like, well, let me pull up, your old files. And just having that support was amazing and terrifying, because the thought that kept coming up for me was, what if I always need help with everything? And how do I accept that? How do I handle that? How do I change who I am at my core? And so that was September, October, November, December. I was slowly, and I would say I was committed to doing what I needed to do to help myself heal. And I had a lot hinging on the outcome. Like, okay, I give myself permission to accept help, through Uber for the next few months, but then I need to get it together and be myself again. So that was going on. November 1st, I found out that in the accident, my eye had moved in my skull, and I was legally blind in my left eye because my brain had just shut it off to help. So it was, right after Christmas in December, where I was like, gosh, I've been in vision therapy for 7 whole weeks, and I'm still not seeing well out of my left eye. I laugh now because, being such a high achiever and perfectionist, failure didn't exist in my book.
Right.
And I'd never given myself an opportunity to fail. And now I'm faced with the possibility that things that are out of my control are, potentially going to affect the course of my entire life. So it really became like an instance of adapt or die. And I remember thinking to myself while I was walking around Scottsdale Quarter that I had to change because I had no control over when I'd be able to drive again. I had no control over if my eyes were ever going to cooperate, if I would ever be able to go back to work, or even if I would ever be able to go out to dinner with my husband again. And I just had that like clear as day, like, I don't want to do this anymore if this is the way it's going to be. And then there was this like soft voice that was like, you know what, but you're worth learning how to change this. And so I just picked up my phone and I called Brian and I just told him, I am not okay and I need help. And I'm just tearing up right now because it's even then, like even with me saying I'm not okay and I need help, I put on such a strong front that even he didn't really understand. And so learning how to ask for what I needed and learning to take off my I got it facade and my that strong, powerful persona I'd created, I realized how much that had cut me off from being a part of a community and, the giving and receiving that's inherent in being part of a tribe, and how, part of my identity was doing it on my own, and like how much that was actually getting in my way.
Yeah.
Because I had all these tools, I had all these resources, I had so many incredible people, yourself included, who, loved me and cared about me and wanted to support me and wanted to pick me up and take me somewhere. And yet I was in my way of accepting that help.
Yeah.
So that was the turning point. That was the, oh, okay, now my life depends on me changing. And yes.
I mean, it's just so beautiful, like seeing that point of, I almost want to call it like acceptance for the way life is, the lack of control. What freedom or permission did you give yourself in that moment? And I know it's been an ongoing thing, but what has that opened up? And what have you been able to experience on the other side of now stepping into learning to be a better receiver and learning to be a better asker of help?
That's such a great question. I love that. So my overachieving side really actually helped in this because I
want to be the best receiver ever.
Yes. That's how I am. I threw myself into it. And I was like, okay, so I've determined that it's not working the way I'm doing it. And I've determined that I want to get better. And I want to, if not get better, adapt and thrive in this difficult situation. So I actually made a checklist of what I gave myself permission to do.
Wow, a checklist, finally.
So that's thanks to Dr. Morgan Francis.
Yes.
It was a light bulb. She had us write out a list of things we gave ourselves permission to do. And I was like, oh, ooh.
A list? Don't mind if I do.
Yeah. So I remember on my list, it was like I gave myself permission to not have the answer. I gave myself permission to be messy. I gave myself permission to be told no. I gave myself permission, and I actually have the list still in my journal. It was like 2 pages long of all of the things I was giving myself permission to do. And it was very, very, very uncomfortable because it was so different. And it was incredibly freeing because I started to question why? Well, why do I always have to say, sure, I'll do that for you? And that became really freeing because I started to realize how little I enjoyed my wonderful life and how much the stress of constantly being on and fixing and saying, yeah, I got that, like how much that actually wore on me. And when I started to say no, and at first it was because I had to, but when I started to say no, it actually opened up so much time and space for me to figure out actually what I wanted to do. And
wow.
yeah, and it shifted from me doing everything that I thought would be good for me to do or would help other people for me to do to really like figuring out what it was that I wanted to do. And that difference between doing something out of obligation versus doing something because I was passionate about it. And so like that was a whole new possibility for me because I knew in my head the difference between doing something because it's on your checklist versus doing something because you really, really, really love it and care about it. And yet it's so easy to, like, for me to rationalize, oh, well, you know, someone will be upset if I don't do this, or, I don't love this, but it would look good on my resume, or I don't hurt anyone's feelings by saying no. And I just realized not only is that not beneficial to me, but it's not serving them if I'm not 100% in. And so that's a huge, huge gift that I've gotten through this past year.
And I like really want to underline that because I think there's a few people listening that need to hear that twice. That when we say yes out of obligation or out of a desire to please someone else or prevent them from being upset with us, but we show up at that commitment not actually all in or resenting that we even said yes in the first place, that it's a disservice to the person we say yes to. That changed my life when I started to learn that lesson. And I think it's an ongoing lesson I'll always be working on. But I really want to underline that for people who can just relate to that overachieving nature that you and I share, and also just the desire to really serve others. It comes from a beautiful place, but oftentimes it is fueled by not the intentions that we would want, the intentions to please someone else or prevent them from being upset, versus coming from a place of truly just contribution.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh gosh. So I know, because I've gotten to just witness it firsthand, how you and Brian both have now taken your experience, and you're very much still recovering. And we'll talk a little bit about that too, but talk a little bit about how it's fueled this deeper purpose with the work you'd already been doing with Love Your Brain and some of the other causes that you're passionate about, how now it's just fueled an even deeper connection to that work.
That's such a good question. And this is what, really excites me, because out of all of that pain and all of that frustration and all that unknown has really opened up a new way of living life for me. And so at first I really rejected the traumatic brain injury community because I thought to myself, okay, well, this is something that happened to me, but I don't want to be defined by it. I would also say, okay, my injury is really bad, but it's not permanent. And for a lot of people in the TBI community, it is permanent. And I was rejecting those things because I always came from a place of, being the teacher of the class or being the facilitator of the workshop. And a turning point for me was attending the Brain Injury Alliance of Arizona's Rays of Hope conference in May. And, I walked into, my therapist made me go. I walked into this conference, and it's a day designed around brain injury. And, I walk in with I got this persona. And, people thought I was a caregiver or a teacher. And I just realized, it made me realize again how the way that I put myself out there kept me from connecting. And that came from a place of fear. Like, okay, well, if I'm not this, then who am I? So that was a turning point in my relationship with connection. And so that was difficult because, again, it was accepting, okay, well, like, this is a club I don't want to be in, but here I am.
Yeah.
And so what can I do now with my experiences and my resources to help serve other people? So it's ignited this desire to share and to give others hope, and to realize that, okay, as I'm getting better, like in the past, I would have waited until I was 100% better before I ever started talking about my experiences.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I did that, and you can too. So it's just accepting where I'm at in the process, and that allows me to connect with others. From a standpoint of, hey, I don't have it figured out. I'm still in all of these types of therapy. And what I can share with you is that it works. And it just brings about, more of that human connection. I don't know that I can put that into better words right now, but it's less of the way that I always grew up was, okay, this is the right answer, and here's my checklist to get to the right answer. And now it's none of that. It's the right answers are out the window, and here's you and I just talking and connecting about, what brain injury can look like and how the recovery journey is.
And I think there's something in that for all of us to learn, because this was something that I had struggled with as well, is feeling like I had to be at my end point before I could ever start making a difference. And the truth is, this is actually something I learned and I really coached others in when I was working more in the health and fitness field. People don't need you to be at the end, like the finish line of your success story. They just need to know you're in the journey with them, and for you to share honestly what that has looked like and what you're learning that maybe could help them too. And that just gave me so much freedom in my own journey, not to have it, as a perfectionist, not to have it all figured out before I ever got started to make a difference, trying to make a difference for someone else.
Yes. I mean, you said that so well, because, again, it was going back to like my ego, and, it was about me. Like, I'm going to put together this perfect presentation and, have it be, the best presentation you've ever seen, which is not connecting with others usually. I mean, that's
Yeah.
And so it's giving, going back to your earlier question, I had to give myself permission to show up as I was each day. I'll say that again. I had to give myself permission to just show up.
Yeah.
Period. End of story. to show up and be honest.
Which is, I believe, one of the bravest things any of us can do.
Yeah, I mean, it's terrifying and it's so freeing, because I realize now how often I would say no to things because I wasn't ready, because I hadn't taken this course yet, because, my Instagram is not perfect, so I can't do a podcast. So, like, I would just create all of these reasons not to do things.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just to hide that. I was like, oh, they're going to figure out that I don't have it all figured out. It's funny to think of it that way. And of course that still comes up for me even before the podcast. It's like, okay, did I prepare for this? I'm like, no, just just connect, just be in the moment, just show up.
Oh, and you are showing up so bright and just so real. And that is what has made a difference for so many women within the Powerhouse Women community already. And then now just the wider audience that we get to share this part of your story on the podcast. And it is just one part of your journey that will continue to unfold. And I'm so grateful that we got a chance to share a little bit of it today. One of the things that I know we can do to support you and the work that you're doing is through supporting the Love Your Brain Foundation. So do you want to talk a little bit about that foundation, what services they provide, and then where we can donate if we feel compelled to do so?
Oh my gosh, thank you. Yes. The Love Your Brain Foundation is an organization. It's a 501c that was created by Kevin Pierce. So he was a internationally acclaimed snowboarder, and he had a training accident just before the Olympics in 2010, and he sustained a traumatic brain injury, and he had to retire from his sport. He spent weeks in a coma. He had a very severe brain injury, had to relearn how to walk. Yoga and meditation were a huge piece of his recovery, and they've been a huge piece of my recovery. And so Kevin Pierce and his family created the Love Your Brain Foundation. And who they are and what they're about is they build community and foster resilience in the traumatic brain injury community. And Brian had actually found out about Love Your Brain years ago through Lululemon, and had attended the Love Your Brain teacher training. And, when my injury happened, he mentioned, you should look at doing Love Your Brain yoga. And I was thinking, I'm going to be better, before that ever comes about.
Yeah.
And so when I gave that up and actually allowed myself to be a part of the Love Your Brain community and the brain injury community, it gave me a lot of passion for sharing my story with others in the TBI community. And with it being an invisible injury, a huge tenet of the free yoga program that Love Your Brain offers is to share your stories and connect with others. And that helps to build resilience in the TBI community. So Love Your Brain gives free yoga, brain-friendly yoga to the TBI community. And then they bring healthcare practitioners in. So they have a program at Barrows. They have a program actually all across North America. And it's just fantastic. And if anyone is looking to support Love Your Brain, I have a link on my page, on my Instagram page, to make a donation directly to Love Your Brain. And then Brian and I are really passionate about sharing it. So we have a bunch of events throughout the fall and the winter to raise awareness and raise funds for Love Your Brain. So you can follow on at Baptiste Power Yoga Phoenix to see those events.
And I will link all of that, including your Instagram page, so people can see it in all of its imperfections, right?
Yes,
I love that.
Very imperfect.
I love how that was like such a holdup for me too, that you mentioned like, oh, my Instagram doesn't look like I want it to. No, but what you're doing is so important. And now being so willing to share your story at the point of the journey that you're in, and just showing up and being honest about what this process has looked like for you has truly made such an impact on my life. And I know so many others. And I really want you to know that, like, your bravery and your willingness to just be in this journey and share from the standpoint that you're at is the biggest gift to everyone around you. And I'm so grateful.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. That means so much to me. And if there's anyone who's listening to this and, is like I was a year ago at, wow, that sounds so good. And how do I do it? Yeah, just please reach out to me. My inbox is open. I'd love to hear your story. And that's what has kept me going throughout all of this, is knowing that being brave and sharing my experiences might help one other person. It's really shifted the focus off of me and put it into who I can serve. And I've learned that from you, Lindsay. And honestly, it saved my life having that. It's not about me anymore. It's about the people who need to hear this.
Yeah.
And so if you're listening and you need to hear this, please reach out and say hi.
So I have one final question, and yes. I think I'm going to edit my typical final question and just speak directly to those who are listening today that can relate to your story, because they do find themselves on the after side of a trauma, or maybe it's the death of a loved one, or some experience in life where you can distinctly remember life before and life after. And it feels difficult on some days to take that next step forward. But you know that this community exists for two reasons: to remind all of us that we're not meant to do it alone, but also to encourage women to take that next step toward their big dream or their big idea. And so I want to leave it to you to share, if you had just one message for the women who find themselves in that place on the other side of, or I love how you so eloquently said, part of a club they maybe don't want to be a part of. What message would you share to encourage them to take the next step?
Oh, that is such a good question. I would just want to say that it is possible. You can keep all of the wonderful things about yourself that you love, and you can ask for help, and you can change. And, you can find the people who will hear what your story is and truly connect with you without trying to fix you or judge you. I know that I was really worried about judgment, and sometimes I picked the wrong people to talk to. And so I just want these women to know that I believe in them, and that there is so much hope and so much possibility. And, just take that first step, that really scary first step, even if it's just like, I had all these reasons, like, oh, I don't have the right words to ask, what do I need to say? Just say something. I think if I really sum it up into, a couple words, it would be like, just show up.
Yeah.
It looks like.
Oh, that's so beautifully said. And I'm just really grateful for our time today. So thank you so much for being here.
Me too. Thank you so much, Lindsay.